Hey guys, this is Josh over at Zion Hill Baptist Church. I'm going to be coming to you tonight out of Mark. And before we get started, let's pray. Lord, I come before you tonight. I just thank you for many blessings. Thank you for everything you do and have done for us. I ask you to be with us tonight, prepare our hearts for your word, Lord. In most holy and precious name. Amen. All right, so like I said, we're going to be coming out of Mark. I love Mark because Mark really goes into the life, the daily life of Christ. He goes more into the miracles and things like that we can really dive into. The last lesson I said we're probably going to be diving back into the Old Testament. Well, tonight for some reason we're here, and I listen to the Lord, and I pray that this is His word and not mine. So let's get started. We're going to be in Mark chapter 5, verse 21, and we're going to read throughout this story. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him. While he was by the lake, then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet, instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. Because, she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some of the people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion, with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. Now, there's two different little stories in here. I really want to talk about the woman that met him in the crowd, but it's hard not to talk about the little girl. So let's go ahead and talk about the little girl first. So this synagogue leader comes to Christ and he says, "Okay, look, my daughter's dying. She's sick. It's not good. I need help." And he recognizes the fact that Christ is the healer, the great healer. Obviously, because up until this point, Christ has done many miraculous things. He's healed lepers. He's restored the blind. He's done so many amazing things. But here's the deal. Jairus is a synagogue leader, which means he's with the Pharisees and Sadducees. He's not necessarily one of them, but he's of the same cloth. So for him to come and say, "I need your help," that's a big deal. We overlook sometimes the fact that Jairus did not necessarily believe that Christ was the king. He just knew that he was a healer. And it wasn't Jairus' faith that healed the little girl. It was the fact that God had pity on Jairus, and he had pity on the little girl. So, with that being said, let's get past the little girl coming back from life. I know that's a massive story in itself, but tonight I really feel like we need to talk about this other one. So Christ is walking through this large, massive crowd of people because he's just restored a man from demon possession. He calmed the storm. He told the story of the mustard seed and growing seed, and he's talked about all these miraculous things. And And so he's got some levity. He's got some ground to stand on, is the best way to put it. And so he's standing there in the middle of this crowd trying to push his way to Jairus' house to save this little girl. And all of a sudden, he just feels drained. He feels like the power has left his body. He can definitely feel something's different. And in a crowd of people, okay, imagine this. You're surrounded, it's like New York rush hour. I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of that, or I've never been there, don't plan on it. But they're sitting there and all it's just bumper to bumper with people. People are just all over people. They're bumping into folks. It's just chaos. Can you imagine that? And then all of a sudden you going, who touched me? So you can justify what the disciples said. It says, you see the people crowding against you, his disciples answered, and yet you can ask, who touched me? In other words, who do you think you are? What are you saying? Another moment, the disciples did not have faith and realize that they're talking to the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. In their mind, they're talking to a great teacher. So when he says, who touched me, because he can feel the power leave his body, he's not going, I get that there's 300 people around me, and they're all trying to touch me because they want to be healed, but they have no faith. Somebody has faith, and they touched me, and they have been healed, or they have had something miraculous happen in their life. I know this. I just want to see who it is. And so this woman who has been bleeding for how many years? I can't even remember now. All of a sudden, I'm too excited. For 12 years. She has been bleeding for 12 years. She is, and here's the deal. We're not going into the gross aspect of this, but because of the way she was bleeding and how she was bleeding, she was considered unclean. She was not able to worship in the temple. She was not able to go and ask for sacrifices and ask for things like that. She was considered unclean. She was somebody that nobody wanted to talk to, nobody wanted to be around, because in their minds, she was so nasty and so dirty and so unclean, not physically, but spiritually, because she had this malady, she had this problem that they thought it would rub off on them, and then they couldn't go serve God and they couldn't go worship God because they had been in contact with her. So the reality is, for 12 years, this woman has wanted peace. She has wanted to serve God. She has wanted to do something for God, and she has her moment. But because the crowd is so crazy, the crowd is so thick, instead of her being able to go, Master, Master, please heal me, in her mind, she's like, there's no way I can ever get that kind of time with him. There's no way he will ever stop his day for me. And so in her mind, she goes, okay, if I can just touch his clothes, just touch the corner of his coat, maybe I can be healed. Isn't there power in that? I think that's just so cool. That instead of being like so many who are crowded around Jesus going, oh, this hurts. Oh, I can't do this. Oh, please help this. Please do that. She just fights through the crowd just to touch the corner of his robe. Yes, it would have been awesome to be able to talk to him, but she knew the reality of the situation was that wasn't going to get to happen because she was unclean. And the moment people realized who she was and the fact that she was in the crowd, she could have possibly been killed. With that being said, she could have possibly been killed. Did you get that? You see, because in that time and frame in history, and especially in the Jewish culture, man, if you were unclean and you put other people in jeopardy, they had the right to stone you. They had the right to kick you out. There's a reason there were leper colonies. There was a reason that people would pass on the side of the road and not help the wounded man on the side of the road. It's because they didn't want to be considered unclean. It's not because they didn't want to help. It's that there was fear in their religion. That's sad. Beyond that, I think it's amazing that this woman had enough faith to say, if I just touch his clothes, if I can just touch the corner of his robe, my body will stop bleeding and I will be able to serve and worship and live. You know, I look back on life and I go, man, how many times in my life have I had an opportunity to touch the cloak of Christ. Not physically, figuratively, of course. And I pass it up because I want something more that I don't deserve. How many times have I said, God, I want to do this, I want to do that, and God's going, dude, just be happy where you are. Love me, not the world. Love me. You know, you got Jairus pulling Christ on one side and the crowd pushing him, and Christ stopped the moment he felt the power leave his body. He stopped because he wanted to know who had that kind of faith. We serve a God that in the middle of a crowd, when he feels the power leave his body with hundreds of people touching him at any given moment, he stops to see who his servant is. We serve a God that in Genesis, he put the stars in the sky, and it says he knows them by name. Scientists tell us it's impossible to count the stars. God put them there. He knows exactly how many there are. They say it's impossible to count the sand on the seashore, but he put it there. He knows how much is there. He knows the hairs on your head. He calmed the sea when the sailors were scared. He was sleeping. They woke him up so that he could calm the sea. When the sea was storming again and the sailors were out, his disciples, these men of God that we have read about, and they were terrified and they were afraid because they thought a ghost was coming across the lake. He walked out and called one of them to him, and Peter walked on the water. We serve a God that raises men from the dead and little girls from the dead. And yet we don't have faith enough, like this woman, to reach out and just touch the little corner of him. We don't have the faith to fight the crowd. In her case, under pain of death, she could have literally been killed. We don't have enough faith in today's time when it's free for us to be on social media like right now and be telling other folks about God and have the opportunity to tell the world about God. But we can't even tune in. We can't even show up to this. That's a shame. No, I'm not knocking you, Zion Hill Youth. It's a shame in general. Please understand that's not against you. It's an outward look. We forget the gifts that we have and the glorious grace that he shows us. You see, the reality is we're not much different from this woman. Instead of having a physical bleeding, we are bleeding morally and spiritually and religiously. I hate that word. I really do. I'm not a religious person other than in brushing my teeth and putting on deodorant. And I just hurt some feelings, and I really don't care. You see, we focus on words and not salvation. We focus on, oh, we had 300 people in the sanctuary this morning. Well, guess what? You ain't had but 3 or 4 the last couple weeks. How many people are actually tuning in and worshiping God? That hurts. I've caught myself. I'll own that. The reality is, we take God's grace for granted. See, the disciples took Christ for granted so often that he didn't even care about it anymore. At this point, Christ is going, yeah, I can feel that. I'm God, remember? Because they're still thinking teacher. And sometimes I think we as Christians do the same. We look at God and go, oh, you're God, you're God, you're God. Let me read your book and read and listen to the teacher. But we forget that God is still alive today. We forget that we serve a living God the God that put the stars in the sky. And he knows them by name. He put the sand on the seashore. And he knows where each grain is, even as it moves in the ocean in the waves. He put the hair on your head, the clothes on your back. We forget about grace. Grace is not just what saves you from your sin. Grace is what saves you from the world. You see, grace, God shows us grace by giving us Tylenol for when our head hurts. He didn't have to give a doctor one day the ability to do that. That's grace. He had pity on us when he didn't have to. That's literally the definition of grace. When someone says, okay, I'm going to do something for you, even though you don't deserve it. I'm going to love you, especially when you don't deserve it. Christ loved this woman, and yet he never saw her. But because her faith was strong in him, she was healed. How many times in life have we had an opportunity to show God's grace and not had enough faith to share his grace? Don't forget, never let someone's lack of faith hinder your amount of faith. And we let that happen too many times. Guys, this may be 1,000 different directions, but for some reason, this is where we're supposed to be. I would love to tell you where we're going to be next week, but God has a plan for that too. I love you guys. For me and my family, we miss you very much. Bye-bye.